All right, let's pick up with the political decline. So this is the people to people relationships that are happening, and this covers the last three chapters of Judges. So let's sort of jump into this. We'll get into the scripture and sort of come back and talk about what just happened with the Levite and his concubine. So Judges chapter 19, verse 1. In those days, in those days, this is the wild, wild west. And everyone's doing what is right in their own eyes, so don't expect anything different because it's in those days. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite residing in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine became angry with him. Now, this idea became angry with him isn't the best translation. This is using the New Revised Standard Version. Other versions of it may say she played the harlot or was adulterous, and that is the better idea to be conveyed here. She committed adultery against her husband. So his concubine committed adultery against him. That's the way to understand what's going on right there. And she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah and was there some 4 months. Verse 3, then her husband set out after her to speak tenderly to her and to bring her back. He had with him his servants and a couple of donkeys. When he reached her father's house, the girl's father saw him and came with joy to meet him. So what happened here? She left him because she was committing adultery. She committed adultery. Then she left him to go back to her father's house and was there some 4 months. So it wasn't just like I'm there for a couple of days. It's an extended period of time. And he set out after her to speak tenderly to her to bring her back. So this speaks of reconciliation right here. Not divorce, not condemnation, but reconciliation, right? To bring her back. Reconcile. Verse 4. His father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank, and he stayed there. On the 4th day, they got up early in the morning, and he prepared to go, but the girl's father said to his son-in-law, fortify yourself with a bit of food, and after that you may go. So the two men sat and ate and drank together, and the girl's father said to the man, why not spend the night and enjoy yourself? When the man got up to go, the father-in-law kept urging him until he spent the night there again. So he's being delayed here by the hospitality of his father-in-law, and you don't want to be rude to the hospitality of someone else, especially in ancient culture, okay? Verse 8, on the 5th day he got up early in the morning to leave, and the girl's father said, fortify yourself. So they lingered until the day declined, and the two of them ate and drank. When the man with his concubine and servant got up to leave, the father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, look, the day has worn on until it's almost evening. Spend the night. See, the day is drawn to a close. Spend the night here and enjoy yourself. Tomorrow you can get up early in the morning for your journey and go home. But the man would not spend the night. He got up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. So they're at Bethlehem, heading back towards the hill country of Ephraim where they're from, and they arrive next to Jerusalem. He had with him a couple of saddle donkeys and his concubine with him, and I think also his servants, whatever. Verse 11. When they were near Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, come now, let us turn aside to this city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it. That seems reasonable. But his master said to him, verse 12, we will not turn aside into a city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will continue on to Gibeah, because Gibeah is part of Israel. It had been conquered, whereas Jerusalem, at that time, Jebus, had not been. It was occupied by the Jebusites. Verse 13. Then he said to his servant, come, let us try to reach one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or at Ramah. So they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. So let me pull up the map here and see if we can see what's happening. Okay, so he's somewhere in the hill country of Ephraim. He comes down to Bethlehem, which is right here. Let me make these labels a little bit bigger. There we go. So he comes down to Bethlehem, which is down here somewhere. Well, actually, it's right there. To get his wife, who's been adulterous, to reconcile with her. That seems what the scripture seems to be saying. Then he's journeying back by Jerusalem, and he's like, no, we're not going to turn aside here because these are foreigners. we're going to go either here to Gibeah or here to Ramah, because these are places in Israel, and essentially we'll be safe. Okay? So that's what he's doing here. And they make it to Gibeah. Where's our scripture? Here we go. Verse 15, they turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. He went in and sat down in the open square of the city, but no one took them in to spend the night. So no one was really extending hospitality to them. Verse 16, at the evening there was an old man coming from his work in the field. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was residing in Gibeah. The people of the place were Benjaminites. So here the people are being identified, and it makes more sense as we go on in the story. But these are Benjaminites who are in the city of Gibeah. Verse 17, when the old man looked up and saw the wayfarer in the open square of the city, he said, Where are you going, and where do you come from? He answered him, We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to my home. Nobody has offered to take me in. We are your servants. We have straw and fodder for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me and the woman and the young man along with us. We need nothing more. So he's saying, I'm not really going to be a burden to your hospitality. We just need a place to stay. We have food and stuff for the donkeys and for ourselves. We just need a place to stay. Verse 20, the old man said, Peace be to you. I will care for all your wants, only do not spend the night in the square. So he brought him into his house and fed the donkeys. They washed their feet and ate and drank. So that's standard hospitality, right? Verse 22, while they were enjoying themselves, the men of the city, a perverse lot, surrounded the house and started pounding on the door. They said to the old man, the master of the house. Now they're pretty straightforward in what they're about to say. Bring out the man who came into your house so that we may have intercourse with him. I mean, there's no reading between the lines right there. They want to have sex with this man from the hill country Ephraim who went and got his concubine. Verse 23, and the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. So for them to want to have sex with this man is a huge breach of, hospitality for one, because this man is letting the Levite and his concubine stay in his house. So for them to ask of this is like a horribly wicked thing for them to do, and it would make his hospitality look terrible. So he sort of responds in the best way he can, although it's not good anyways. We'll see. Since this man is my guest, do not do this vile thing, right? He's my guest, so to do a vile thing to his guest would be absolutely horrible to his reputation. Verse 24. This is why he sort of offers up verse 24. Here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Ravish them and do whatever you want to them, but against this man do not do such a vile thing. So this is a horrible statement, right? Rape them or do whatever you want to them. Well, for them to rape the man is worse than for them to rape the daughter and the concubine. In ancient eyes, in the ancient world, that's just how it was. For the man who he's trying to show hospitality to, for him to let him be raped is worse than for his daughter and the concubine to be raped. So he's doing, because he's in between a rock and a hard place, he's doing what is best. I can't even use that word. It's not best. He's doing what he can with the situation he has without having harm come onto the man, if that makes sense. Verse 25. But the men would not listen to him, right? They want the man to have sex with him, to rape him. So the man, now this is probably the Levite, not the man of the house. So the man seized his concubine, so that kind of gives away his concubine. So the man seized his concubine and put her out to them. They wantonly raped her and abused her all through the night until the morning. There is the great atrocity that happens in this scripture story. This Levite's concubine is raped all night and abused until the morning, and essentially it kills her. Continue on, verse 25. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. As morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. Verse 27, in the morning her master got up, opened the doors of the house, and he went And when he went out to go on his way, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. Notice she's not past the threshold, just her hands on it. Verse 28, "Get up," he said to her. Well, that's a nice greeting for your wife that was just raped all night. "We are going." But there was no answer. Why? Because she's dead. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man set out for his home. When he had entered his house, he took a knife, and grasping his concubine, he cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. What? Okay. Verse 30, "Then he commanded the men whom he sent, saying, Thus shall you say to all the Israelites, Has such a thing ever happened since the days that the Israelites came up out of the land of Egypt until this day? Consider it, take counsel, and speak out." So there's the great atrocity. And there's sort of what happened. She gets cut into pieces and sent throughout all Israel as sort of a rallying cry to say, we have to do something about this great injustice because she was raped to death. And because the Gibeonite men wanted to rape him. So here we go. In those days, it's not surprising. It's not surprising because it's the Wild Wild West. Remember, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Yahweh was not acknowledged. The people did whatever was right in their own eyes. So what happens next, the whole rape scenario, is shocking, but it's not surprising because now in the people-to-people relationships, you see Israel acting among itself as the people of the land act among themselves, which is they kill one another. They treat one another horribly. Because in the beginning, the people-to-people relationships was Israel with the people of the land taking on their foreign gods. Now, you see in the people-to-people relationship, Israel is against Israel. And the Levite and his concubine, this story sets up why the tribe of Benjamin comes to near extinction. Because it was at the tribe of Benjamin in Gibeah where this thing took place. And the people of Israel are going to be rallied to come against Gibeah, and Benjamin is going to back Gibeah. So it's really Benjamin against all of Israel, and there's going to be a battle, and Benjamin is going to be defeated. And so this sets up why Benjamin almost got defeated or almost eradicated or extinct as a tribe of Israel. This sort of sets up why this happened. It's because of the Levite and his concubine. But let's look at this story a little bit. This is just sort of broken down into a few bullet points of what happened. It starts off that she is unfaithful. She commits adultery. And she leaves him, the husband, returning to her father's house. So there's not only adultery, there's also physical disconnect. She's just not where she's supposed to be as if she is a wife, right? He goes to get her, probably with the idea of reconciliation built into it. And he journeys home after a time, and he stops in Gibeah for the night, right? Not Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is a place of foreigners, but Gibeah is supposed to be a safe place because it's among other Israelites, although we realize it's not safe. But he stops in Gibeah. The men of Gibeah want to rape the man, but instead, they get the woman. She dies from being raped and tortured and all that stuff all night, and then is used as a rallying cry against Benjamin, to rally Israel to fight against Benjamin. It's really against Gibeah, but then the Benjaminites back the people of Gibeah, so it really becomes Israel against Benjamin. That's what happened in the story. And it sets up why Israel fights against Benjamin. But notice here, it's Israel fighting against itself. In the beginning, in the prologue, political decline, Israel was fighting against its enemies. Now Israel is fighting against itself. That's one of the themes that has come full circle here. And so we see, this is like the hill country of Ephraim, whatever. He comes all the way down here to Bethlehem to get her. Comes next to Jerusalem, doesn't go there, but he goes to Gibeah. And after Gibeah, he travels back home. So that's sort of where this is taking place. Right in the heart of where Israel is supposed to be. So the Levite and the concubine, what's happening in the story? You may not like to hear this, but this is what's happening in the scripture. the Levite's concubine, the woman, because she's never named, the Levite's concubine commits adultery, and she's physically dislocated from her husband. Essentially what happened, she broke the covenant. She left. Let's look at this real quick. His concubine became angry. Remember, we said that idea of being angry is not the best translation for the NRSV. It's more of harlotry or adultery. She committed adultery. So she became angry, or she committed adultery, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem. Now, we saw how far the hill country is from Bethlehem. She was physically dislocated, right? And was there some 4 months. So it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to go visit for a few days. This was, I'm leaving you. But her husband set out after her to speak tenderly to her and to bring her back. So that speaks of reconciliation, right? So he's going to reconcile with her or something like that. It probably was not divorce, because you wouldn't have the idea of speaking tenderly and bring her back if he was going to serve her divorce papers or something like that. So we see this happening here. She left the covenant. She had a covenant with him, with the Levite. She left the covenant through adultery and physical dislocation. Here's the very hard thing we have to think through, and think through it biblically. What would be the fruit of what she has sown? Remember what she did. Adultery, physical dislocation. What is the fruit of what she has done? Because here we have sort of on a small scale a picture of some of the things Israel has done. Because Israel has been like adulterous towards Yahweh. But what would be the fruit of what she has done? Well, let's look at what she has sown. She left him, right? We saw that, the physical dislocation. She left her husband. She had sex with other men without his consent, right? Because they're in a marriage relationship. She should only be having sex with her husband, but she committed adultery. So she had sex with other men without his consent. That's what she has sown. And she left him. What happens? What does she reap? Well, let's read down here in the scripture so we can see it unfolding. Where is it? So here, verse 25, but the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and he put her out to them. What did he do? He left her. He left her. The man now leaves her. She left him to begin with, but now he leaves her. And other men, the men of Gibeah, have sex with her without her consent. So the man seized his concubine and put her out. He leaves her. They, that's the men of Gibeah, wantonly rape her and abuse her all through the night until the morning. Men have sex with her without her consent. We see here the principle of sowing and reaping happening. She left him and had sex with other men without his consent. So what happens to her? He leaves her and other men have sex with her without her consent. What is sown is reaped. Now, this is very hard for us to understand and stomach because we live in the day and age that we do, but it doesn't really change the principle of sowing and reaping, because we have to understand and think biblically and ask ourselves, what would be the fruit of what she has sown? And we see that happening here. She left him, now he leaves her. She has sex with other men without him wanting her to do that. And so now other men have sex with her without her wanting it to happen. Because we are living in those days. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, and when everyone did what was right in their own sight. This is how it is. And this story sets up why one tribe, that's the tribe of Benjamin, is brought to near extinction. Because this is one act. Remember, I hate to say it, but rape happens all the time. But this is one act, right? But even the fruit of this one act, look at what it yields. One tribe, in response to this, their solution to this woman being raped, or this man being raped, because that's what the men wanted to do in the beginning, was rape the man, not the woman, sets up why one tribe, the tribe of Benjamin, is brought to near extinction. Are you telling me a tribe being brought to near extinction is what should be happening for the rape of one person, whether it was the man or the woman? That doesn't make any sense, but this is the downward spiral. This is reaping and sowing, because you put one corn seed in the ground. Guess what? You get an ear of corn back with hundreds of seeds on it. This is the principle of sowing and reaping, and we see it happening here. That this one tribe is brought to near extinction, because in those days, there was no king in Israel. There was no regard for Yahweh. And people did what was right in their own eyes, and they thought they were right. Look back to the Micah story that we just looked at in the last video. Micah thought he was right. He thought God was blessing him because he had set up this idol and this Levite had come to his house. But that was a misunderstanding of how Yahweh works, and they missed it. And so we see it here with the Levite and his concubine, the setup for this tribe being extinct. They're sowing and they're reaping, and they're misunderstanding things, because in those days, it was the Wild West. There was no regard for Yahweh, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so you have to ask yourself, are we in those days? I think we might just be living in those days, because it surely seems like the Wild West nowadays. Anyways, moving on. One of the things happening here in the scripture, in this story, is it's sort of explaining why Saul fails. Saul is the first king anointed to be king of Israel by Yahweh through Samuel. This is what you read if you read 1 Samuel, which is another book of the Old Testament. So, Saul is discredited. Why is Saul discredited? Well, let's look for a second. 1 Samuel 9, 1-2. Notice where Saul's from. There was a man of Benjamin, whose name was Kish, of Abiel, of all these other guys, hard names to pronounce. He was a Benjaminite, a man of wealth. He had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. He stood head and shoulders above everyone else. There was a man of Benjamin, who is Saul. Well, what tribe is going to be brought to near extinction? Benjamin. And this is Saul of Benjamin. But what town is Saul from? Let's look at this real quick. Saul also went to his home at Gibeah. Where did the rape of the Levite's concubine happen? Gibeah. One of the things happening here in the Judges story is to set up why Saul is a bad king and should be rejected. Because Saul is a Benjaminite from Gibeah, and nothing good comes from Benjamin of Gibeah, because Gibeah is where this atrocity occurred and where Benjamin is nearly wiped out. So this story helps set up why Saul is discredited and why David is exalted. Saul is from Benjamin, and nothing good can come from there. Also, the same act that the Levite does, Saul does as well in a slightly different way. Let's look at that one. 1 Samuel 11:7. 11 verse 7. He took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by messengers, saying, whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so it shall be done to his oxen. So what is he doing? He cuts up an oxen in pieces and uses it as a rallying cry to bring Israel to him. That's what the Levite did with his concubine, cut him up. So they're trying to make the connection here that you should be seeing Saul in this same light, that he is discredited because he's coming from Benjamin, right? And he's doing some of these same acts. He does the same thing as the Levite does, doing it as a rallying cry. So Saul is discredited and David is exalted, because Saul is linked to the story showing that nothing good comes from Gibeah or from Benjamin. And the conclusion you're supposed to draw from Saul being placed at this atrocity in Gibeah, or his namesake being placed there, is that David is the true king of Israel, not a descendant of Saul. Because there probably were descendants of Saul saying David stole the kingship. And here this is given to say, no, Saul is a bad king because he comes from a bad area. right? Nothing good comes from Gibeah of Benjamin, because this is where that atrocity occurred. So that's also another thing being played with here in this story, sort of in the background. And if you don't know about it ahead of time, it's hard to sort of pick that up. So we're going to go on in the scripture. Let me get back here to Judges. Where are we? Chapter 20, I believe. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to sort of skip through this and read a little bit of it. I just kind of want to talk about it in generic terms here. But what we're going to see happening here is Israel's going to rally to fight Gibeah. The Benjaminites are going to support Gibeah. So it's now going to be Israel against Gibeah. And they're going to fight. They're both going to kind of destroy each other. But ultimately, Israel's going to nearly wipe out Benjamin. And then they're sort of sorry for doing that. So chapter 20, verse 1. Then all Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba. So that's like from the very north to the very south, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled in one body before Yahweh at Mizpah. So they all gather up and they come and camp out right here north of Gibeah. So then they present themselves and they say, how did this crime happen? And then the Levites said, hey, I came to Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin, and we spent the night, and they rose up against me and surrounded the house. They wanted to kill me, and they raped my concubine until she died. Then I took my concubine and cut her into pieces, because that's a great idea, and and sent her throughout the whole extent of Israel, for they have committed a vile outrage in Israel. So now you Israelites, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. All the people got up as one, saying, we will not any one of us go to our tents, nor any one of us return to our houses, but this is now what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. So basically, we're going to plan to absolutely destroy them. We're going to, as it says here in the ending of verse 10, going to repay Gibeah, Benjamin, for all the disgrace that they have done in Israel. So what do? They gather against the city and they go up against it. But they ask the tribe of Benjamin, you need to help. But what does Benjamin do? Verse 12, the tribes of Israel sent men throughout all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what crime is this that has been committed among you? Now then, hand over those scoundrels in Gibeah so that we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel. But what happens? But the Benjaminites would not listen to their kinsfolk, the Israelites. Benjamin sides with Gibeah. You see here that disunity that started sort of in this Deborah story coming full circle, where Israel is now going to fight against Israel on a tribal level, and it's not going to go good. Verse 14, so the Benjaminites came together out of the towns to Gibeah to go to battle against the Israelites. So now at the prologue, we started with Israel fighting its enemies. Now Israel is truly fighting itself. Verse 15, on that day, the Benjaminites mustered 26,000 armed men from their towns, right? And then it says the Israelites, verse 17, the Israelites, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men armed, all of them warriors. So you have 26,000 versus 400,000. I wonder who's going to win, right? Just in the sheer numbers, you know that the Israelites are going to win. Although, from some of the stories in Judges, you can't always go by the number or the size, because Yahweh can bring about victory however he chooses. And so we see some of that happening here. Because as we're going to read in some of these verses here, which I encourage you to read, is that Benjamin kind of whoops up on Israel a little bit. Israel inquires of God, hey, should we go up and attack them? And God's like, yeah, go ahead and do it. But then they get defeated. And so it looks like Benjamin is going to defeat Israel. But you see here Yahweh, the true king of Israel, orchestrating these events in the background. And he's having Israel and Benjamin destroy one another. Why? Because they are acting like the people of the land. But when it comes down to it, the Benjaminites are destroyed. They're nearly extinct. So we're going to skip down to that. So there's a little bit of back and forth. Benjamin sort of defeats Israel. Then Israel comes back and defeats Benjamin. And when it's said and done, we come down to the end here, and it starts to say this here. Here we go. Verse 46 of chapter 20. So all who fell that day of Benjamin, so this is when Israel finally got one up on Benjamin, were 25,000 arms-bearing men. Remember, they started with 26, so you only have 25 left. You're nearly wiped out. all of them courageous fighters. But 600 turned and fled toward the wilderness, toward the rock of Rimmon, and remained at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. So the people who are left is 600 out of 26,000. And they were there for 4 months. Meanwhile, the Israelites turned back against the Benjaminites and put them to the sword, the city, the people, the animals, all that remained. Also, the remaining towns they set on fire. So Benjamin is nearly wiped out. I think there's less than 0.1% of Benjamin left. If you take the ratio there of 26,000 and only 600 left. Let's go to our slide for a second here. What happens here is an Ellie, an extinction level event. An Ellie. You've watched that movie back from the late 90s, Deep Impact. They talk about Ellie, which was an asteroid coming towards Earth to destroy it, and they called it an extinction level event. Like, this is something so catastrophic it completely wipe us out. Well, Benjamin here experiences an extinction level event because Israel rallies against Gibeah, and Benjamin sides with Gibeah, so it's really Israel against Benjamin. It's 26,000 men of Benjamin against the 400,000 of Israel, and it's not going to end well. Benjamin starts off pretty good. They start routing the Israelites a couple of times. And it looks like they're able to hold their own, but what does God do? He basically has them beat up each other. And Israel ends up routing Benjamin. And of those 26,000, only 600 men are left. That's less than 0.1% of Benjamin left. That is an extinction level event. And that, my friends, is the fruit of the downward spiral. When you reject God as king in your life, this is what happens. You get reduced to nothing. You end up destroying yourself, and you're left with nothing. An extinction level event happens, and your hands are the one that have caused it. Benjamin is reduced to near nothing. But Israel feels bad about it. Let's go back to the scripture here. Now the Israelites, this is Judges 21, verse 1. Now the Israelites had sworn at Mizpah. So whenever they were rallying together here at Mizpah to go against Gibeah, they made a vow at Mizpah. Now if you remember from the Jephthah story, don't make rash vows. Don't vow at all. It's so dumb. You don't need to. What did they say? What did they swear at Mizpah? No one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. So this is like a spiteful thing. Like, hey, Benjamin has been so bad, they're siding with these Gibeonites for this atrocious act that happened there. We're not going to give them any of our daughters, right? Because the Israelites are supposed to intermarry, not marry the foreign women. So this is sort of like Israel being a jerk, right? We're not going to give any of our daughters in marriage to Benjamin. And they made this vow. But they're sad for making it. Why? Because Benjamin is nearly reduced or nearly wiped out. They're reduced to 600 men. And how are they going to repopulate? They killed all the men, women, and children in the cities and towns remaining. It's just these 600 men left hiding out at this cave, at this rock. Verse 2, and the people came to Bethel and sat there until evening before God, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. They were crying. They felt bad. Why? Verse 3, they said, O Yahweh, the God of Israel. Okay, now you're acknowledging God, like, come on. Why has it come to pass that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel? Why? I can tell you why. You've been rebellious. You've reaped what you've sown. You've turned away from God, and this is what happens. Because your life and your sustenance, Israel, comes from Yahweh. So this is why these things have happened, because you've done it your own way. But anyways, they plead, they ask this. Verse 4, on the next day, the people got up early and built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and sacrifices of well-being. Then the Israelites said, which of all the tribes of Israel did not come up into the assembly of Yahweh? For a solemn oath had been taken concerning whoever did not come up to Yahweh at Mizpah, saying, that one shall be put to death. We're going to pick this up in the next one and talk more about the tribe of Benjamin and these rash vows that are made, and hopefully we'll have enough time to get into our practical application, because this is the depth of the downward spiral.